It's time for episode 2 of Random Blends. Are we going to make something that's really good like last time, or is it going to be less than ideal? Let's find out. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Hutch, and thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the world of whiskey. So that's right, we are breaking out the whiskey wheel again and digging into episode 2 of Random Blends. If you recall from last time, the way this works is I'm going to spin the wheel. It's going to select random bourbons and ryes for us to mix together, and then I'm going to taste and evaluate that blend on the spot. Part of the reason I do this is so that I can expand my own palate, but it's also so that together we can see some whiskey combinations that we wouldn't otherwise ever think to put together. Last time we had a really good blend actually between Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Proof and Belle Meade Reserve. Both of those have been taken off the wheel. I've added a couple extras and removed some others, so swapped them out. We've got a fresh 14 here, and we're just gonna spin and get 2 today and put them together and see what happens. All right, without further ado, let us spin the wheel for our first pick of the day. Cheers, everybody. All right, Buffalo Trace, a classic. It's gonna be really interesting to see how a staple that I really enjoy goes with whatever else comes up next. So, bourbon number 1 down, Buffalo Trace. Let's see what comes up next as bourbon or rye number 2. Cheers again. Weller Special Reserve. Okay, interesting. So we've got this mix of Buffalo Trace products, a wheated and non-wheated product. I mean, I'm sure people have done this before, but we're gonna go with it and see how these two staples from Buffalo Trace end up tasting together. All right, we've got the 2 bottles out now. Let's just do a quick overview of what we're looking at. So we've got regular Buffalo Trace, which is a 90 proof bourbon, undisclosed mash bill from Buffalo Trace Distillery, but has rye content in it for sure. Classic quintessential bourbon. A lot of people's go-to sipper for around 30 bucks. Getting harder to find because everything from Buffalo Trace is harder to find. Speaking of harder to find, we've got Weller Special Reserve as well. Probably even harder to find than the regular Buffalo Trace. The whole Weller line eventually becomes Pappy Van Winkle, so we're looking at juice that eventually becomes this legendary bourbon, and that's kind of trickled down to this becoming hard to find. But again, also 90 proof, wheated mash bill from Buffalo Trace. So you would guess that they might marry well together, but you never know, these could sort of clash. So let's just dive in. I'm gonna start pouring, and we will make our random blend. So Weller Special Reserve and Buffalo Trace. While I'm doing this, just want to say that if you're liking this video, smash that like button. If you like the idea of doing random blends and sort of testing your palate, put in the comments below what you've tried before. And last but not least, if you're liking all the content coming out of the channel, hit that subscribe button. Helps the channel grow, but also helps me know what specific kind of content to keep creating for you guys. All right, we have got pretty equal parts here of Buffalo Trace and Weller Special Reserve. I'm going to blend them now, and then we will wait just about 10 minutes. I'll come back and we will dive in. I don't think it's fair to do it right away, so we'll give it some time to mingle and breathe. It'll be about 2 seconds for you and 10 minutes for me. Okay, everybody, we are back. It's been 10 minutes. I've let this concoction blend of Weller Special Reserve and Buffalo Trace mingle for a bit, and now we're just gonna dive in and review this kind of interesting blend from the same distillery, different mash bills. Different types of bourbon here going into one glass. I enjoy both of them, certainly like the Buffalo Trace, probably a little bit more than the Weller Special Reserve, but really do like the Weller Special Reserve, especially in summertime, which it is now. So we'll see how this blend comes together. Let's check it out on the nose. Okay, lots of cherry and grape. I mean, I get those a bunch on the Buffalo Trace, but it's almost like a vanilla cherry grape bomb. Okay, there's a good little touch of spiciness. I feel like the Weller Special Reserve is a very soft and approachable thing, and Buffalo Trace is very approachable too, but has a little bit more of a spice to it. Though I think the Weller Special Reserve has a little bit of a cinnamon spice to it sometimes. But yeah, I'm getting like a good baking spice note underneath all this like vanilla and cherry and grape. And it's like simultaneously fresh and fruity and also a little bit darker and heftier. I think this fruity light nature of the Weller Special Reserve and the darker, fuller bourbon experience from Buffalo Trace are kind of both coming through on the nose. It's a touch astringent, just a touch of ethanol coming through, even after 10 minutes. It's kind of interesting. It's just super sweet, but also, I don't know, there's this touch of freshness that makes me think it's got a little bit more rye than it certainly does, because this is a wheated and this doesn't have that much rye in it, but something like that coming through. Maybe it's a graininess, a slight graininess. Anyway, pretty solid nose overall. Inviting and rich, fresh, bright in some ways too, so kind of a weird blend. But let's get into the palate and see how that turns out. Cheers. Wow, okay. That experience, front palate was like gobs of vanilla and caramel. I think that both of these have vanilla and caramel to some degree. Buffalo Trace probably has more caramel in it, but that's what I got on the front palate. Mid palate was a bit spicier, went like a little bit more cinnamon or baking spice oriented. And then the finish was like all cherry and oak. Less oak, more cherry. So overall, a kind of fruity, rich vanilla caramel experience, really good. I don't think the finish was like super long. It almost dies off a little bit, but it's got a good cherry lingering feeling and good oak too. So overall, I'm not upset at all with this blend. I think it's going pretty well so far. I wouldn't say it definitely elevated either one of these bottles, but I think it's coming together as something that's at least comparable to both of them. Let's go back in for a second sip and see if we pick out any extra flavors here. Cheers again. Okay, so there's that classic Buffalo Trace. That sip, best way I can describe it, was like a spicy grape, like big grape note in the middle, and then fading into some spice and a little bit of vanilla and cherry, like really prominent grape. I don't get the grape as much on the Weller Special Reserve, but I get a lot of it on the Buffalo Trace. And I think maybe the Weller is sort of softening things and really drawing out the fruitiness of the Buffalo Trace and its own fruitiness, and I'm getting so much fruit here, so much grape and so much cherry. All right, let's go back in one more time and do what we always do for the third sip and focus on the finish. Let's actually revisit the nose real quick here. Cherry, vanilla, spice, grape, and then this like little bit of youth, like grassy graininess that you get on some ryes and some younger bourbons. Maybe that's some of the Weller Special Reserve coming through. The Buffalo Trace, I believe, is around 8 years old. Weller Special Reserve is probably a little more around 6 years old average. So maybe a little bit of the youth of Weller Special Reserve is shining through, but certainly not an unpleasant nose and something that's quite inviting. Just kind of interesting that that like fresh rye sense of it, or a younger sense of it, is coming through. Let's go back in for the third sip. Cheers. All right, so now that my palate's acclimated more to it, the front palate's probably the weakest part. It's more of just like a general vanilla sweetness. Mid palate explodes with this like grape, spicy, cinnamon, cherry experience. I mean, it's almost like drinking grape juice or some sort of cherry juice. It's sort of like a juice box kind of experience where there's like really prominent sugary juiciness going on, and then the back end is a little bit spicier, lingers with some simmering heat, and has a cherry oak kind of feel to it. Overall, I mean, I would say that it's kind of clear that these two are brothers when you taste them, or that they have a similar DNA in terms of coming from Buffalo Trace. I think I get more grape and darker notes on the Buffalo Trace itself, but a lot of that good fruitiness and a little bit of spice and cinnamon spice comes through on the Weller Special Reserve for me. So they marry well, and I think the fruit might just be a heightened feature of having the wheat mix with the traditional bourbon. Overall, do I think that the blend is better than its individual components? I'd say I'd probably gravitate to it over the Weller Special Reserve. That's probably because I mostly enjoy the Buffalo Trace more, and having some of those darker, richer features in there is helping out the Weller Special Reserve. But in terms of being better than the Buffalo Trace, I think it's about on par, if not a little bit worse. I think that juiciness and fruitiness can taste a little synthetic, whereas Buffalo Trace, I think I get a rounder, deeper experience with a little bit more complexity. So overall, solid blend. Nothing offensive. It's not like these two somehow made each other worse or came together to make something that I couldn't possibly recommend. If you have both of these bottles, I encourage you to do this yourself. Try them together, see if you get that bouquet of fruits like I did for sure on this unique and random blend. All right, everybody, I think that about wraps up this second episode of Random Blends. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey to expand our palates, try new things, and let chance decide what bourbons and ryes we mix together. And until I see you guys again for another video, all I can say is keep drinking good whiskey, keep expanding your palate, and cheers.